Sign this tonight, or I will make sure you never close another deal in this province." My brother-in-law said those words quietly, the way men who are used to being obeyed say things quietly. He didn't need to raise his voice. The document was already on the table in front of me, sliding across the mahogany like he was doing me a favor. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Yorkville condo, Toronto glittered. 40 floors down, people were living normal lives. I was up here being handed $300,000 worth of someone else's debt and told to be grateful for the opportunity. I didn't sign. I picked up my wine glass, set it down on top of the document, and walked out. Before I tell you exactly how I ended his career, his marriage, and his freedom inside of 3 weeks, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments. What is the one thing you did for family that you now regret? I read every single one. I drove home on the 401 with both hands on the wheel and my jaw locked so tight it ached. My name is Simone. I am 31 years old and I am a compliance officer for a mid-size investment firm in the financial district. My entire job is finding the things someone is trying to hide. I look at documentation the way other people look at faces. I read what is underneath. My brother-in-law had no idea who he had just tried to bully. I want to tell you about my sister first, because you need to understand her to understand any of this. Haley is 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the one our parents called gifted. She had the grades, the charisma, the way of walking into a room and making everyone turn. I was quieter, steadier, the kind of kid who color-coded her notes and read the fine print on things. Our parents loved us both, I think, but Haley was the event and I was the venue. That dynamic never really changed. She married Garrett 6 years ago. He was 38, she was 27, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He'd built a real estate development company from a franchise his father had left him, rebranded it, put his own name on it, and rode a hot Toronto market for a decade until everyone thought he was a self-made genius. He was charming at dinners. He remembered birthdays. He called our mother Mrs. Malice LeBlanc with a smile that she absolutely loved. I never trusted him. I couldn't tell you exactly why at first. It was just a small, persistent feeling, like a smoke detector with a dying battery. Not alarming, just there. The first time I felt it sharpen into something real was 3 years ago. Haley called me in tears because their joint checking account had been cleaned out. Garrett told her it was a cash flow thing, temporary, that the business was just in a cycle. She believed him. She always believed him. I offered to look at their finances and she told me not to make it weird, so I didn't. I let it go. That's the one I regret. The evening at the Yorkville condo had started as a family dinner. My parents drove up from Hamilton. Haley cooked salmon. Garrett opened a good bottle of Barolo. It was normal until it wasn't. After dinner, Garrett asked my parents to watch something in the living room. He'd set up a movie, very thoughtful. And then he steered me toward his home office on the pretense of showing me something on his computer. The document was waiting on his desk. He'd planned the whole thing. The dining room, the wine, the distraction. All of it was to get me alone with that piece of paper. It was a personal guarantee. Under it, I would be co-signing responsibility for a $310,000 business loan Garrett had taken out 18 months ago, currently in default. His company, GSR Developments, had already received 2 notices from the lender. He needed a co-signer with a clean credit profile to buy time for a refinancing deal he was allegedly putting together. He presented it to me like a formality, a favor between family, something I should want to do. I said no. He smiled and said I didn't really have a choice. I said, watch me. Then he said the thing about making sure I never closed another deal in this province and I left. In my car on the 401, I started going through everything I already knew. The thing about being a compliance officer is that you spend so much time looking for problems in other people's files that you develop a particular kind of patience. You learn to be still while the picture assembles itself. I was still now. The loan in default. The cash flow problem 3 years ago. The fact that he planned this entire evening. The fact that he needed someone else's name on his debt. None of this was the behavior of a man whose business was fine. I got home to my apartment in Leslieville just before 11. I made tea. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to sleep anyway. I started with what was publicly available. In Canada, a lot more is on record than people realize if you know where to look. Corporate registry filings, property title transfers, court records. I started with GSR Developments. The company had 4 active properties listed 18 months ago. Now it had 1. 3 had been sold, and not at numbers that suggested a thriving market. 2 had sold below assessed value. 1 had sold to a numbered company I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. Then I went looking for the numbered company. It took me 40 minutes, cross-referencing the Ontario Business Registry with Federal Incorporation records. The registered director was a name I didn't know, but the address on file was Garrett's mother's house in Oakville. That is the thing about people who think they are clever. They are lazy in the details. They use the same addresses, the same names, the same passwords. They believe their own legends so completely that they stop checking the doors. I sat back and looked at what I was building. Garrett had sold 2 of his development properties to what appeared to be a company he controlled through a proxy, likely at artificially low prices to move assets out of the reach of creditors, while simultaneously trying to get a family member to co-sign his defaulted debt to buy time. In Canada, that kind of asset transfer, done while insolvent or to defraud creditors, falls under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and can constitute fraudulent conveyance. It is not a civil matter, it is federal. But I needed more than a theory. I called my sister at midnight. She answered on the second ring, which told me she wasn't sleeping either. "Did Garrett talk to you after I left?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "He said you were being difficult. That it was a small thing and you made it into a fight." "Haley, I need you to listen to me very carefully and I need you not to tell him I called." I paused. "When is the last time you looked at your own finances, your personal accounts, your RRSP, your name on the mortgage?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I checked the joint account," she said slowly. "Not the joint account, your accounts. Separately, yours alone." She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the television still on in the background, the movie Garrett had put on for our parents probably still running, and I thought about how thoroughly he had staged that whole evening. Every detail managed, every person in the right room. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said quietly. She hung up. I didn't sleep. I kept pulling thread. By 3 in the morning, I had found something that made my stomach drop. 2 years ago, Haley had a TFSA with about $47,000 in it. I knew because she'd mentioned it when she opened it, proud of herself for finally doing it, and I'd helped her pick the contribution room calculation. That account, under her SIN, had been redeemed in full in March of last year. I found the record through a text document she'd forwarded me once, months ago, for something unrelated. I still had it in my email. I opened it now. The TFSA withdrawal was listed as income in her name, but Haley had told me last Christmas that she was thinking of increasing her contribution this year. She had no idea the account was empty. He had redeemed her TFSA without telling her. $47,000. Gone into what I now suspected was the same sinkhole swallowing everything else. I stared at the ceiling for a while. There's a specific kind of anger that has no heat in it. It's not the kind you cry over or scream about. It sits in your chest like ballast, heavy and cold and very, very steady. I felt it settle in now. He hadn't just built a bad business. He had been systematically stripping assets, including my sister's, and trying to recruit me as the next layer of protection. And the reason he had staged the whole evening, the parents, the wine, the theater of it, was because he was out of options. You don't go to your sister-in-law at a family dinner with a personal guarantee form unless you are cornered. Cornered animals are dangerous, but they are also sloppy. My phone lit up at 7:15 in the morning. It was Haley. "My TFSA," she said. She didn't finish the sentence. "I know," he said. She stopped, started again. He said he was going to reinvest it, that a GIC was performing better. He said he would show me the paperwork. Her voice was very quiet. I never asked for the paperwork. "Don't ask for it now. Don't say anything to him today. Can you do that?" "What are you doing, Simone?" "My job," I said. She was quiet. Then, "Okay." I called my firm's legal department before 9 and explained that I had a personal situation potentially involving fraudulent conveyance, undisclosed asset transfers, and a possible Ponzi-style use of personal accounts. I wasn't asking them to act, I was asking for a referral. They gave me 2 names, a forensic accountant who worked on insolvency fraud cases, and an RCMP contact in the Financial Crimes Division who accepted civilian tips with documentation. I already had documentation. I had been building it since midnight. I want to tell you something about my sister, because this is the part that was hard. I had spent years watching her choose him, Every time I felt that small alarm in the back of my head, I had said nothing because she would have defended him and I would have lost access to her, and she would have been alone with him without even me at the edge. So I had stayed, shown up at dinners, been polite to the man while watching very carefully from the corner of my eye. I don't know if that makes me strategic or cowardly, maybe both. But I knew, sitting at my kitchen table that morning with 2 hours of sleep and a cold cup of tea, that the reason he targeted me was because he'd already taken everything he could from her. I was the next resource. I was the clean credit score, the stable income, the compliance officer with no flags on her file. He'd done the math, he'd decided I was next. He'd made a mistake that cornered people always make. He showed his hand. I spent the next 4 days building the file. I worked in the evenings after my regular job, cross-referencing land transfer records, corporate filings, the tax document, the bank statement I asked Haley to screenshot and send me. The original loan agreement Garrett had emailed her a year and a half ago when he'd been more confident and less careful. She found it in her deleted folder. He'd asked her to review it and she'd forgotten about it entirely. That email was significant because it showed Haley's name had been briefly listed as a guarantor on a draft of the loan agreement before being removed in the final version. It suggested Garrett had originally planned to use her and then, for whatever reason, maybe she pushed back without realizing the full implications, maybe the lender had flagged a conflict, had pulled her name, which meant he had already tried to use his own wife as collateral before he came to me. I sent everything to the forensic accountant on a Thursday afternoon with a cover note explaining the timeline. He called me back in 2 hours. "This is a solid package," he said, which, coming from a forensic accountant, is roughly the equivalent of a standing ovation. He said the fraudulent conveyance angle was strong, the undisclosed TFSA redemption was potentially criminal, given the power of attorney implications, and the attempt to have me sign the personal guarantee while material information was being concealed was its own separate issue. He asked if I wanted him to help structure the report before I submitted it to the RCMP Financial Crimes tip line. I said yes. We filed it on a Friday. I didn't tell Haley what I had filed. I told her to make sure she had access to her own accounts, her own SIN documents, her own passport, and that she should open a separate checking account in her name only. I said it matter-of-factly, the way you tell someone to pack an umbrella because the forecast looks bad. She didn't ask questions. She had already started to understand. 3 weeks went by. I went to work. I slept. I did not call Garrett. I did not respond to the one text he sent me, which said only, "Hope there are no hard feelings. Family first." I deleted it. I did not tell my parents anything. My mother called me twice and I talked to her about her garden and whether the Hamilton traffic was getting worse, and I felt absolutely nothing about keeping the secret because the secret wasn't mine. The crime was his. On a Tuesday morning, I was in a compliance review meeting when my assistant knocked and said I had an urgent call. It was Haley. Her voice was strange, flat and thin at the same time. "There are 2 men here," she said. "They have badges. RCMP. They're asking for Garrett. He's at work. They want to know if I can tell them when he'll be home." "Tell them the truth," I said. "Did you do this?" "Yes." She didn't say anything for a moment. The meeting room had gone quiet. I stepped into the hallway. "He's going to lose everything," she said. "He already spent everything, Haley. He just hadn't told you yet." I heard her exhale. It was a long, slow sound, like something deflating that had been held at pressure for a very long time. "He took my TFSA," she said. Not a question. Not even really a statement. Just a person hearing a thing out loud for the first time in a language they can finally understand. "He took your TFSA," I confirmed. "He transferred 2 properties at below market value to a company he controlled. He tried to use you as a guarantor 18 months ago, and when that didn't work, he came for me. The file is with RCMP Financial Crimes. There's also a CRA referral for the asset transfers. It's not going to be one thing, Haley. It's going to be several things." Another long pause. "What do I do?" "Call a family lawyer today. Not a shared one. Your own. I'll text you 2 names right now." I had already looked them up. "And Haley, you are not in trouble. He is." Garrett was charged 6 days later. Fraudulent conveyance under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. 2 counts of fraud over $5,000 under the Criminal Code. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit had found more than I had, because once you give investigators a thread and they pull it, the whole sweater comes apart. There were 2 other investors who had put money into GSR developments under misrepresented terms. The numbered company in Oakville had received 3 transfers I hadn't even found. His business partner, who I had never met, had already begun cooperating. His bail conditions included surrendering his passport. His face appeared briefly in a Toronto Star business section item about a development company under investigation. The comments, from people who had done deals with him, were not kind. My mother called me when she found out. I had been waiting for this call. She was upset, not angry, exactly, but the particular distress of someone who has to restructure their entire understanding of the last 6 years. She liked Garrett. She had called him a good man at least a dozen times. She had bragged about him to her friends in Hamilton. She kept saying, "I don't understand how this happened," and I kept saying, "I know, Mom," because there was nothing else useful to say. She would understand eventually. These things take time to settle. She asked me why I hadn't told her sooner. I said because I didn't know sooner. That was mostly true. The other part of the truth was that I had protected her from the version of events she wouldn't have believed. She would have called Garrett to ask if it was true. He would have managed her. And I would have lost 2 more weeks. "You should have told me," she said. "You would have told Garrett," I said gently. She didn't answer. She knew I was right. Haley stayed in the house while the legal proceedings started. She'd hired her own lawyer. She was in the process of separating her name from every account and every property. The house itself was mortgaged to almost its assessed value, which Garrett had also not disclosed when they renewed 2 years ago. There would not be much left from it. But her lawyer was pursuing the TFSA redemption as a civil matter alongside the criminal proceedings, and there was a reasonable case. She called me on a Sunday in November, and we talked for 2 hours. It was the longest conversation we'd had since we were teenagers. She said she kept going back through things, small things, and finding the moments where she'd noticed something wrong and talked herself out of it. A bank statement that didn't add up, and then did. Somehow. A conversation that stopped when she walked into a room. The DRAC guarantee email she'd told herself was a misunderstanding. She said it felt like standing in a room and watching all the furniture rearrange itself into a shape you should have recognized years ago. I said I knew. I said I had my own version of that furniture. "Why did you keep coming to dinners?" she asked. "If you didn't trust him." I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because you were there," I said. "And I wasn't going to leave you alone in a room I had a bad feeling about." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I'm sorry I told you not to make it weird. 3 years ago, when the account got cleaned out. You didn't know. I didn't want to know." "That's different," I said. "And it's okay." We sat on the phone in silence for a moment, which is something we hadn't done since we were kids. 2 girls in separate rooms talking about nothing and everything and mostly just not being alone. It felt like that. Garrett's trial date was set for the following spring. His lawyer was managing the optics and trying to negotiate. But the RCMP file was substantial and his business partner's cooperation had reportedly been detailed. I didn't follow it closely. I had given everything I had to the people whose job it was to carry it, and then I had stepped back. That's the part nobody tells you about doing the right thing. After the call, after the file is sent, after the charges land, there is just your regular life waiting. Your commute reviews, your sister's Sunday phone call, the ordinary world, which turns out to be exactly enough. I still live in my apartment in Leslieville. I walk to the coffee place on Queen Street most mornings. I have a cactus on my windowsill that I've somehow managed to keep alive for 3 years, which my colleagues consider a minor miracle. My life is not dramatic. It is mine. I used to think that keeping the peace was a form of loyalty, that staying quiet was how you kept people safe. I understand now that silence isn't neutral. Every time I swallowed the feeling in the back of my chest, every time I told myself it wasn't my business, I was making a choice. And that choice had a cost, even if I wasn't the one paying it. I'm not telling you to blow up your family. I'm telling you that the smoke detector going off is not the problem. Ignoring it is. If you have ever stayed quiet about something you knew, just to keep a seat at the table, drop witness in the comments. Share this if you believe that protecting someone sometimes means saying the thing they don't want to hear. There's a moment, somewhere around 2 in the morning with a cold cup of tea and a laptop full of land transfer records, when you stop being someone's sister and start being the only person in the room who is paying attention. I didn't plan to end up there. I didn't want any of this. But I think about Garrett sliding that document across the table, so practiced, so sure of himself, and I understand now that the thing that undid him wasn't me. It was the years before me. Every shortcut he took, every account he quietly emptied, every time he bet on someone not looking closely enough. He had built an entire life on the assumption that people who loved him wouldn't check. That's the thing about choices that seem invisible at the time. They aren't. They accumulate. Garrett didn't arrive at fraud in one dramatic moment. He arrived there one small compromise at a time, each one making the next one easier, until draining his wife's TFSA without telling her felt like a reasonable business decision. That's how it works. Not a villain's monologue, just a long series of moments where someone decided that what they wanted mattered more than what was right. I think about Haley saying she didn't want to know. I understand that too. There's a particular exhaustion in seeing something clearly when the people around you need you not to. It takes a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like making things awkward at dinner. It looks like being difficult. I stayed quiet for 3 years because I told myself I was protecting the relationship. What I was actually doing was protecting my own comfort. That distinction took me a long time to sit with. What I know now is that understanding a situation isn't enough. You have to be willing to act on what you know, even when acting is inconvenient, even when it costs you the version of the family you wanted to have. That's not cold, that's honest. Haley needed someone who would do the uncomfortable thing. I'm glad I was eventually that person. I'm not glad it took me as long as it did. The file I built wasn't complicated, it was just thorough. I followed the records where they led, I wrote down what I found, and I handed it to people whose job it was to do something about it. That's all. Competence in the service of something that matters is not revenge, it's just responsibility. What I carry from this isn't anger. It's a clearer understanding of what I owe the people I love. Not agreement, not silence. Honest attention, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Haley and I talk on Sundays now. We are rebuilding something that is smaller than what we had before and more real than it ever was. I still walk to the same coffee place on Queen Street. The cactus is still alive. My life looks the same from the outside, but I stopped swallowing the smoke detector feeling, and it turns out that one change makes almost everything else clearer.